Hello ladies and gentlemen, Willie here. No changes, we all remember it very well, right? Back in the months leading up to Classic, you could barely join a conversation about the game and not hear it mentioned, and I reckon the idea behind it was pretty simple. No changes, no extra convenience factors, no shortcuts in the game, no easy mode, no heirlooms, no LFG, just no changes. Vanilla as it was back then, but now. The game remade for the modern WoW player in 2019. And I have to say, even though Blizzard had already been putting effort into recreating Classic in an authentic manner, that didn't stop a very large part of the player base constantly banging on the fact that there must be no changes. I mean, just go and look back at the Classic WoW panel of BlizzCon 2018, which was in November. You don't see the guys on stage talking about how players won't like the features, or that these all change for a reason. It was all about going back and looking about how the game actually was back then, and the challenges in getting it right and creating a true to Classic experience. And the players loved it. Everything about it, hearing about it, all the information that was pushed out, things like the dev water cooler, the challenges Blizzard faced, the gradual stream of information coming out about the game, the not a bug list growing ever longer with long forgotten quirks that vanilla had, wanted quests on signs not having a quest marker, no training dummies, Tauren having a larger hitbox and attack range, the dead zone for hunters and all their other weird little interactions, melee leeway being introduced again, and spellbatching being recreated to get certain ability interactions back into the game like double charges or polymorphs, amongst other things. Quite literally everything was overwhelmingly well received. We certainly had a few players who were doomsaying, but it's World of Warcraft. When is this ever not the case? From the WoW vet, the guy who had only ever heard about the game in vanilla, or the private server player who had run through the content half a dozen times, Classic was set up to be one of the biggest gaming events in, well, a very, very long time. Finally, we could see whether all the guys who had claimed that today's WoW is easy mode garbage and it was super hardcore back in the day, we could see whether their comments actually had any weight to them. And the community surrounding the game was massive, as well as very vocal, as is the tradition with WoW. You have a game be around for this long and stay this popular, you get a lot of very involved people. You have to wonder if there wasn't this huge buzz around the game, whether it would have been any different in release, and honestly, I think it would have been mostly the same, and Blizzard would have made Classic more or less what it is, even without all the no changes chants being heard from all corners of the internet. But at the same time, I can't help but feel it was certainly a good deal of encouragement that this was the correct path to go down, and well, to just keep doing what they were doing. All the communicating, the frequent updates, really digging into player feedback on the beta, but even post-launch with certain things which were found, like enchants taking up a helpful aura slot but being hidden. Classic brings the good with the bad, and I think that players expected that, but did they expect just how things would turn out over time? So, was no changes any good though? That's the tough one, if I'm honest. You see, you do have to consider the good parts with the bad. The fact that Blizzard had tried to make Classic accurate to vanilla has indeed enabled a lot of things that many players couldn't have ever dreamed of. Vanilla, out of any version of World of Warcraft, has had by far the most private servers, and indeed the most functional ones aiming to put out Blizz-like content, and as a result has been the most solved version of World of Warcraft 2. We saw this play out in week 1 after Classic launch, where Ragnaros and Onyxia were downed within days from release, which was a real shocker to the masses who had heard this game was meant to be hardcore. But here we had a guild like Apes running in the very first week with a bunch of classes who weren't even level 60 yet, making the content look like a total joke. And in the weeks to come, many players would see their first way through World of Warcraft's first raid 2. It wasn't just the top end guilds toppling the content with ease, it just wasn't anywhere near the level of challenge it was built up to be. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say the difficulty of LFR is higher, or somewhat comparable, and even in both areas of content, a good chunk of your raid can be totally AFK one way or another, and it's just not a big deal. And this, as we now know, was down to the virtue of our 1.12 client, which there was never really a huge discussion about, since Blizzard said, well guys, this is all we have in terms of backup, and that was that. 1.12 means updated itemization. I mean, just look at a few here that I'm picking out between their introduction and 1.12. It is night and day. or we had items that came out in later patches on launch, like Onslaught Girdle. Many boss encounters had received bug fixes or just straight up nerfs between then and now too. Talents were better as well, much better, as were just your class overall. Add all of this up and you end up with very easy PvE content to the point where the world first race scene lasts for about an hour or two after launch of anything new. And then it's straight on to waiting for Darkmoon Fur Week for speedruns. Speaking of Darkmoon Fur, world buffs. Another thing which was not changed until patch 2.1 in the Burning Crusade. In vanilla, considered to be a fun reward for an epic quest like beating a Nixia. In Classic, a checklist of reasons to keep your main raid logged. I think this is one of the things that players have grown to resent the most, yet still so many scoop them up each week, and why not after all? I'm sure you've heard both arguments about them. Why would you spend hours to get buffs to make a raid about 15 minutes faster? On the other side, the content is so easy in of itself, and if you're not raiding for loot, why wouldn't you want to try and perform as well as you can on your class? Still though, I think it was a bit of a shocker to what extent that world buffs were used by players when compared to vanilla. In fact, in vanilla, the first time world buffs were actively used as a progression aid was on pre-nerf Cthulhu, and then especially within Naxxramas following that. However, on private servers over the years, they have been approached in a different way and just become fundamentally meta to all areas of raiding content, and this is spread over into Classic now, as we can see. Another area that had been figured out coming into Classic was the PvP system that exists. Now, first up, you should know the honor and ranking system releasing before Battlegrounds is accurate to vanilla. Indeed, there was a whole 2 months between those two events, and despite this, very few private servers ever released with honor and ranking without Battlegrounds also active, because, well, yeah, phase 2 PvP servers. Not good. They were fun for like a day or two, but once the honor grind mentality set in, servers started to straight up eat themselves alive as minority factions evaporated overnight, even in some cases being given the chance to transfer somewhere else for free. I believe this was an area where there was some pretty clear evidence that it was not going to be the best idea to follow the exact vanilla schedule. What can I say though, at least we got Battlegrounds after 1 month instead of 2, just to get players out from the open world into these new areas. But wait, Battlegrounds have their own set of issues. We've come to see now how Alterac Valley is extremely heavily Horde favoured in the actual way that the Battleground has been set up, which I did a video about. If you're Alliance and you think your faction just doesn't play Battlegrounds well, it's totally cross-server, and with such a low win rate, with such a high volume of players, it's frankly just totally improbable. That's another thing to bring up actually. You know, Battlegrounds weren't cross-server till 1.12. In fact, having total cross-realms is not like vanilla either. Servers were matched into battle groups, so you might have 4 to 5 servers that could face each other in Battlegrounds. Not literally all of them across your region. Anyway, with Battlegrounds and the eventual nerfing of premades in Alterac Valley, players began to premade across the other 2 Battlegrounds, especially when it's their weekend, and to this day, pugging is still a pretty miserable experience. Classic PvP is all about honor per hour in Battlegrounds. The majority of the participation is for the rewards, which makes it into a math game of I need to play X hours, rather than it's just PvP time tonight with the boys. This is true for the most part at least. Don't believe me? Wait and see how many premades there are a month into TBC, where the best PvP gear is from arenas and the vast majority of classes don't touch anything PvP related for PvE content anymore. You're going to see a big change. I suppose with this system, which may be a bit of a shocker, the Battleground queues are about as short as they ever will be. If TBC releases without faction balance changing, they're going to be a lot worse for Horde, and there will be a lot less players queuing Battlegrounds because people who are competitive will be in arena now and don't really have a reason to do them. Even if we did do battle groups on a 1.12 client, I don't know if AV would ever pop if it were not a holiday weekend. It already practically doesn't on Oceanic Realms as far as I've heard. Or if Battlegrounds were actually just single server based as they were up to 1.12, can I just reiterate? I have a feeling they would just be dead content or win trade honor power farms. In fact, I'm extremely confident that's what they would become. I think premading should have been taken down by a notch by now, but that's just me though. It just doesn't look like it's going to ever happen, so let's move on. You remember how Classic is all about that journey from your fresh level 1 at the character create screen to those lofty goals of being a level 60, hitting up those epic 40-man raids. You've heard so much about it, I'm sure. That journey to get your character to level 10, and then you boost through Stockades, to Scarlet Monastery, to Mara, to ZG, or whatever the route is, I don't know what it is. Even in the early days, players made 7-man dungeons to power AoE down entire rooms, which got nerfed because the XP penalty wasn't correct for groups of over 5 members in dungeons, and after that we had the rise of the Spellcleave dungeon instead. This was a thing before anybody made it to the level where they could boost, and all you ever wanted for dungeons was essentially Priest Mage. They were more than good enough to power farm through anything easily. There were even melee cleaves too, just get a bunch of warriors with Ravager and Sweeping Strikes, and that was pretty solid as well. And the dungeon content has remained such a good way to farm too. All of the old strange pathing methods totally untouched. Mages can boost or farm hundreds of gold each hour, something no other class can hope to get near to. Dungeon farming is just very good XP as well, and it was even nerfed on some private servers. It's been well proven at this point to be the fastest way you can get to level 60. And on top of this, many new methods have been found in addition to everything that was mapped out on private servers, just by having so many players thrown at a common problem. Perhaps one of the biggest issues that's become apparent nowadays has been spellbatching, in that it's not working as it was intended to. Everything is on the 400 ms server loop, interrupts, hard CC, vanish, feign death, the lot, and it's an area that's drawn a lot of resentment, and I certainly do have concerns about this system heading into TBC with Arena, or imagining melee leeway, because you're going to be getting meleeed through pillars by warriors if you're both moving. I think it was an interesting idea to see the system play out again, but I believe it's time to address it, as it totally undermines the competitive edge and being able to make clutch plays, and players know when they fail because of spellbatching, and it just feels really bad because the power is taken out of your hands. If spellbatching were left as it is combined with melee leeway, I think it would really harm Arena as a competitive form of PvP. And there's definitely a few other areas I could go over too, like the server size, but I reckon you get the idea. No changes brought back some expected bad interactions, as well as some new ones, and I reckon you could ask a dozen different players who have been around since launch, and you would hear similar kinds of changes which would near undoubtedly improve the game. Then again, things like the LFG add-on got nuked pre-launch, there's no LFR, social interaction is very much more necessary. You log on retail and you really do see how much different it is still, even with all the various negatives that we have in Classic. And I know there will be people looking back on Classic and saying, well, JL and Breck was clearly right. After all, you think you do, but you don't. Overall though, I reckon it's important that no changes happened, that Blizzard tried to get it as good and close to vanilla as they possibly could, and for us to see that not quite everything was so good, and indeed those goggles that many had on were a particularly deep shade of pink. You know why I think this? For the future of the game, or even for fresh Classic servers one day. Players are really good at finding problems or showing you how things can be exploited, pointing your finger to the player and saying, well, it's their own fault, they shouldn't be doing that. That's not what we intended them to do, and then ignoring feedback or refusing to change it is not a good way to be doing things. It's lazy and arrogant. But this is more so the case with actively developed games, which Classic, well, isn't. So, no changes. Was it any good though? I want to say yes, but only if it does end up being learned from. See my video I did on TBC recently, and I listed a whole bunch of issues myself as well as you guys came up with. If we continue in the future not having learned from it, then I'd say no. I'd hedge my bets a bit more on a yes at the moment, since how vocal players are already being on TBC, as well as predicting some of the issues there. So then, was no changes a good idea or just a train waiting to come off the tracks? Hit me up below, thanks all so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one very soon. If you like what you see, do give the video a like and subscribe, as there will be plenty more to come. Thank you guys all so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.